Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to this almost 3 p.m. live. Uh, it's an interesting story today. We are talking about the media, and with us, we have an interesting story and an interesting person who is none other than Mr. Umesh Anand, a very senior journalist who has been in the media for donkey's years. That's an interesting story in itself, which we'll come to later. But what I want to talk to Umesh about today, Mr. Anand, about today is the civil society story. It's all yours, Umesh. Tell us why civil society. How did it start? It's a nice magazine. It's a large format magazine. I get it every month in my house. It has so many interesting stories on it, and I enjoy reading it.
So that's really good to hear. Um, why civil society? Well, after a long time of doing all the things that the big press does, which includes companies and murders uh, and what have you, mm, uh, just felt there was nothing much more to do, and so how working for brands which are already brands and then trying to improve on them and bring your special perspective in, it's a challenge and a good challenge in many ways, and we lived up to that challenge. um, Refining papers or outfits to look forward in terms of information was a good challenge to take. but but how do you really build a brand in the media with nothing at all?
So this is how Umesh did it. This is civil society. I just need to focus on the magazine. Oops.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, sure.
it's in
Okay,
focus sometime because yeah, the camera is
okay.
acting a bit funny. And
So,
it's this large magazine. Sorry, Umesh, just one sec because I've not introduced you well enough. So Umesh has been a journalist from the 70s, from almost emergency time. He started with the Statesman and then he worked in a whole lot of brands across the country. And this magazine is almost 20 years old. I recommend that you read it, and it's really fascinating for the perspective it takes on India. It gives you a different insight into India and what India is all about. So, Umesh, yeah, carry on. Sorry for the interruption.
okay, no problem. Uh, so, you know, t- in 2003, when we started civil society,
Yeah.
uh, I was then the resident editor of the Times of India in Delhi. So, nothing much changes after that. You can keep doing the same thing in different ways and through different designations. But, I also felt at that point of time, both I and my co founder, who's Rita Anand, my wife, mm, that media was at a kind of dead end. Uh, you could see it slackening in terms of fulfilling what we thought are the responsibilities of media, or the way why we were in the media, because it's a wondrous magical journey, of discovery, of finding stories, of writing things, the way journalists see them and taking it to people. This was less and less of this was happening. So we said, how to start something on your own and invert the model. So you have a lot of money and you're running brands, and you have these big offices and you have everything going for you. What if you have no money? What if you have very little money, and you want to create a brand with your skills? So we thought of many things which we could do. Among them would be travel or investments, right? Because we have the competencies in all these areas, and we could have very well have brought out a personal finance magazine. But he said, one of the most exciting spaces at that time, one of the most exciting spaces at that time was the civil society space, because no one was talking about it, but it kept on coming forward. Why so? Because governments were retreating and the private sector was filling those spaces. Now, this is a very volatile situation in any society. private sector should not fill the public sector spaces. Someone has to, and civil society has a role. So civil society organizations were doing this, but they weren't being seen. And when they were being seen, they were being seen in their own voices. So someone saying, I'm doing something fantastic, but there was no good journalist reaching out and saying, let me see the story in this. So that's why we started Civil Society magazine. And when we sat down and said, what should we call this magazine? We tried many names, and we popped in civil society also, and lo and behold, we got that registered. So I said, wow. Now their civil society was registered, and I said, what should it look like? Mm. So, most social sector magazines, as they call them, social sector, which we don't see it like that. We see these as all mainstream, but most social text magazines are, black and white and dull and dour and drab, and it's we said we'll invert the model. We'll do a four-color magazine, and we'll use pictures. We'll use good headings. We'll use well-balanced stories. So that's what we did.
I can imagine what you're saying because even as a journalist, the NGO sector is a fascinating sector.
Yeah,
They are full of ideas.
yeah.
They're full of agendas also. They are
That's right.
full of packaging themselves.
That's right.
And like the IT sector, for example, it doesn't get reported on from a critical perspective or from a neutral perspective, even.
Mm,
Where someone could evaluate them and say, yes, this is the wheat and this is the chaff. So,
mm.
you all have been doing a great job. Somehow I'm getting a bit stuck with my screen sharing here because of tech challenges. But for those who are interested, I recommend you check out the Civil Society magazine tab on Instagram, and they have a civil society online dot com or dot yeah it's civil society online.com website, which is also there. But Umesh, I think you've been keeping it going for how many years now? 20,
So
21.
2003 we started, 21 years.
21 years, volume
Yes.
21, number 2. That is how many issues a year? 12.
11 issues a year, one issue is a double issue.
Not a joke, not a joke, because each issue is filled with very colorful, bright, interesting, well told stories. What are the focus areas that you like write on? See, I particularly like your writing on agriculture, on the fields. What are your focus areas?
See, I'll tell you, we set certain parameters, and the first parameters we set was that we have only all of us have limited energy. So the first boundary we set was that we're not going to get into criticism of people who don't get it right. Mm. Because it's a meaningless thing. Mm. Yeah, sure, you need to tell people that what you're doing is wrong or whatever. But if you have to choose between figuring out what's coming right and why it's coming right and how it's working, and or choose what's not working, we felt we'd be more excited with telling our readers what's working and why it's working and what it can deliver. It's not to say that there's nothing wrong with the world. We strongly believe there's a lot wrong, which is why we were looking for what we thought would work. So it's not a be happy, don't worry kind of situation. No, not at all. But if you have a limited amount of money, a little amount of energy, where would you put it? So we said put it on what works. Mhm. And for a lot of people, especially in civil society groups, they're busy doing something very good, right? And they're often doing it far from the limelight. Okay, and there is nobody who gets out there and say, "Hey, that's something interesting you're doing. Tell us how it works." Mm. So that's the first thing that we set as a boundary for ourselves. Having said that, we said, now where should we look? We found that there are few civil society entities which would dominate the scene. Okay,
Like
big ones. Yeah,
biggies.
the bigger guys would dominate the
Okay.
scene. The urban guys would dominate the scene. So we
Okay.
sort of get out of that, right? Let's look at the smaller people. And then, most interestingly, every one of us actually constitutes civil society. Every one of us. Mm. We may not be an NGO, we may not be a trust or a foundation, mm, but each and every one of us constitutes civil society. Otherwise, civil society doesn't work. Mm.
Yeah.
It cannot work with just four and a half organizations sitting in the Habitat Center in Delhi. It is civil society in the in the classical way has to be you and me. So is that farmer doing something different? Your farm stories is that government officer come up with something very interesting in a in a remote district? Is there a teacher who's truly exceptional? Is there a principal who's running a great school somewhere? Government school preferably. Is there a doctor or is there a hospital which is working, which nobody has noticed? These are all contributing to what we would like to call civil society. So, healthcare, education, environment, agriculture,
Agriculture.
cities, these all became spaces we wanted to look at because solutions in these would change the quality of life for a lot of
Across the country.
people.
And it's amazing the kind of positive energy that each issue of yours brings out month after month after month is something very positive. But as a media person, I feel, Umesh, that you have made use of your experience very well, in particular to answer two aspects of criticism of the media. One is that the media is always negative, so you're not that. And with all the experience both you and Mrs. Anand have, in terms of getting this network across the country and getting some of the best stories from the country, what's been your experience there? I'm sure it wasn't very tough for you because
So
you've been
I think,
resident editor.
see, I think you should differentiate. You know,
Yeah,
uh, you use the word negative, right? It's not a negative positive kind of thing, right? It's certainly not. We have enormous problems in this country,
yeah,
and it would be wrong for us as people who are empowered both by education, skills, and even money, because we are much better off than a lot of other people in this country. So it would be wrong for us as a kind of elite not to recognize the problems in this country. So our magazine is acutely aware and recognizes and stresses the problems of this country.
yeah,
But having said that, we said this is the problem. Can we find people looking at the solution? Not for half a second will Civil Society magazine say there isn't a water issue in the country. But if you want civil society to write for the 550th time that there is a water problem, that's lazy journalism. Okay, let's get on with finding out what is the way in which water solutions are possible. It's an example. There are other examples. Housing is an example. Housing is an area we've looked at a lot, right? Housing finance is an area we've looked at a lot. There's a need to evolve, right? There's a need to tell governments what you need to tell them, and then there is a need to evolve as well. How do we evolve? How do we recognize the many things that happen in the country which are worth recognizing, keeping in the background the vast problems we have? So we are not a be happy, don't worry kind of setup. We worry deeply about what.
yeah,
Look, I wrote, I think, what's been the first air pollution stories in this country in the 80s. Okay, when I was at the Telegraph. You can go back to the annals of the Telegraph, and in the early 80s, you will see air pollution stories which we carried on the front page of the Telegraph in Calcutta. This was the 80s. It's 50 years today, right, or 40 years today. Has air pollution gone away? No. I could keep writing the same stories. Some of the data at that point of time actually gets reflected even today, whether it's heavy metals or whatever it may be. So, how much do you retell a problem? I think this is an issue for the Indian media to address. We must tell the problems. We must make people face the problems. We must make governments face the problems. We must tell the truth to authority. All this is important, but you can't make a business out of a problem. The business of a country trying to get ahead is to find solutions, and solutions that involve all of us, not the corporate sector or not some little elite preoccupation somewhere or the other, but the solutions that seriously involve the larger number of people in our country. Solutions in nutrition, solutions in housing, which is, to my mind, is even more important than healthcare. Mm. Uh, these are big issues and they need good journalists to look at them. We try in our own small way to address them.
That's very well put. But Umesh, if I were to ask you which were the three most exciting stories that you came across in this long 22-year period, what would you say, for example, from the top of your head?
We've done three cover stories on jackfruit. So,
I know. I've noticed those. I've noticed those, and I've read them with a lot of passion.
and
No,
and
I
you
would
know,
laugh. I would
and,
laugh. I would laugh.
all the journalists who tend to think that these are non-stories, let me tell you, the flood of interest we had on our jackfruit stories and continue to have on jackfruit stories is quite amazing. Mm. Uh, Now, all our stories are very, very exciting. We've done cover story on cities. Who does the city really belong to? Mm, right? These have been stories way ahead of their time. Our first cover story was on the right to information. Okay,
Which
this
year?
was in 2003 September,
Wow.
when there was no law. Okay,
Yeah.
only Delhi had a law. And Delhi's law, by the way, didn't come from any great social sector awareness. It came from the World Bank. The horrible World Bank, because they needed transparency for their projects. Okay, so this is where the right to information idea actually came from. But we said this is something which is going to come in a big way. This is something which is going to make a huge difference to our democracy. And when our laws do evolve to this, which it hadn't at that point of time, things will change in this country, as indeed they did, and they continue to. The right to information is widely used. So now, how would we write about right? Do we write learned pieces which no one can understand? Do we fill them up with jargon and buzzwords which no one can understand? Uh, do we write it as though we know everything? So boring because we don't know everything. So we went looking for somebody who could be the interesting face of this, and we found an income tax officer who was on leave experimenting with right to information. And you know who he was? He was Arvind Kejriwal.
I
So
see.
if you go to the first cover story of Civil Society, you see a picture of Arvind Kejriwal there on the cover, and the headline is, it's on right to information, but the headline is Taxman's Burden. Okay. Now, over the years, we followed the right to information thoroughly, right? We followed people's hearings in detail. These were stories we'd like to do. Rita used to sit in hearing after hearing, making notes, doing this, doing that. In those days, technology was also not that great. In remote corners, in slums, in various places, and we used to keep doing these stories. Now, many journalists just wonder what is the future in this. What are these people up to? Why should anyone be interested? Over the years, we've built an audience, and this audience is diverse, which comes to us for these particular stories because you don't get them anywhere else. And each of these stories for us is massively exciting. Because we removed those barriers of looking out for what we would like to say is information. Our next cover story, which is in the press, it's going to come out in 2 days. The cover headline is "A Brand Gets Built in Rural Bengal." Okay, now you know it's a way of looking at the story. And it's really a livelihood story. It's an empowerment story. It's a traditions and livelihood story. It's so many of these things. But how do we present it?
What's it about?
through- Sorry.
What's it about?
It's about how tussar weavers have been helped to revive, and how a particular brand of
I
cloth
see.
is But now this changes livelihoods, it changes what a village does, and so many other things. So it depends on how you want to perceive your problem and your solution and your reality around you, and how can you engage with more and more people. See, there's little point in Frederick talking to Umesh and Umesh talking to Frederick. You know, it's a recipe for for divorce. Okay, uh, there's a huge advantage in Frederick talking to a whole lot of other people and Umesh talking to a whole lot of other people with the ideas that you have. Now, how do you reach out to those people who aren't your typical readers, right? How do you take these same ideas, which are national issues, national ideas, national problems, and national solutions to a large audience? How do you widen that audience? Now, our
Umesh,
audience is diverse. Our audience includes government school teachers, deputy commissioners in districts, judges of the Supreme Court and High Court. It includes ordinary folks, who just like to buy the magazine, keep it at home, um, school students. It's so how do you meet this communications challenge with these ideas? That's what we try to do.
Umesh, I mean, in the 80s, there was a lot of talk about developmental journalism. Were you influenced by that debate? We don't hear of it now.
No, you do hear of it. A lot of people talk of developmental journalism, social sector. See, I think it's silly for the simple reason that these are all, we have allowed the corporate sector in this country to define us as a society. And this is a crying shame. Why isn't water a mainstream issue? Why isn't it? Why isn't air a mainstream issue? You ask, you tell me. Hmm? Because there's some characters who sit around, who preside over advertising, who preside over newspapers, who don't let this happen. At at the Times of India, when I was the RA, I had an air reporter and a water reporter, and they were called an air reporter and water reporter. They're still in journalism today doing something else. Right? We put on the front page an electric vehicle. We also brought education, healthcare, other things on the front page. These are the not what people consider to be what people who run these organizations consider to be non-sexy.
Tell
But
us,
they are,
tell us.
but actually very sexy because what people are interested in if you write it right. If for the for
They
the
are life and death issues. They are life and death issues. The fate
I
of
think
any
that's
society
but if for
depends
the
on this.
millionth time, if for the millionth time you say that health budgets have not increased,
Yeah.
people stop listening because you're saying it for the millionth time. It's lazy journalism.
It becomes boring. Apart from that, it's kind of demoralizing because we kind of accept this belief that as a society we fail and we are not going to go ahead, which is far
Exactly.
from true. Which is far from
Exactly.
true. It depends whether you want to see the glass as half empty or half full.
Mm.
So all those kind of things are there.
Yeah,
But sorry.
and we just have to get ahead, or you have to lie down and die. So so
No.
you know it's how you want to approach this whole thing. I think private investment is absolutely essential. I don't think that you can do without a private sector. But if you tell me tomorrow that the private sector has to decide what a society must do, uh, I would beg to differ. Right? And if you tell me tomorrow that journalists have to do exactly what companies tell them to do, because otherwise they won't get advertising, I think it's pathetic.
Yeah.
And
Because it's even.
unfortunately, and unfortunately, all our
Yeah.
TV channels, all our newspapers, all our magazines are run on this principle that if you don't do what companies tell you to do, then you're going to be out of business and everyone's going to starve, right? Which is not true, right? Because the owners never starve. They never
It,
starve.
it's like this, Umesh. I mean, when you and me, when we go out and do meet people and do our own form of journalism, however small or insignificant it may be, when you're alone, you realize that this is a country, this is a region with a lot of talent, a lot of optimism, a lot of people
Exactly.
wanting to do good things, and
Exactly.
somehow that story is not getting told. Somehow that
Exactly.
story is not getting told.
Because it
But
doesn't suit people. It doesn't suit people to tell that story. You have
we
health
don't have the
policy.
models. We don't have the models also. See, no one says that this is needed, this is right. We need to look at solutions. This full thing of solutions journalism that has come up now, you know which
Mm.
maybe India was doing a long time back also. But having said that, tell us about your own journalistic story, because I heard so much about you and the early statesman's days and things like that. I
So
always
my journey has been very simple. I've been
very exciting, I would say.
I just dyed in the wool journalist. I started as a statesman, spent perhaps a year and a half or two there,
That was
and
in
then,
the 80s,
then
80s
left.
or late 70s,
Sorry,
late 70s or early 80s,
no, this was in the 80s. 80,
80s.
because in 82 we started the Telegraph in Calcutta,
And
and
you were on the first team of that,
yeah, I was probably one of the first employees,
together
and
with together with
there were
MJ
a couple
Akbar and
of
who else?
Kumar was there, and
Sorry.
there were there were a few other people,
Yeah.
but those of us who joined at that time joined before the launch of the paper, and so the paper didn't exist when we joined. Mm.
Yeah.
And I gave up a very safe job, what was considered a safe job at that time, the statesman, to go there,
Understood.
purely because I thought MJ Akbar was, and I still think he was and remains a huge talent in journalism, and was very attractive to work for him at that point of time. So went and the Telegraph was the next 9 years of my life, and then I worked.
Just hold on a minute. Just hold on a minute. That was journalism ahead of its time.
Of course, yeah, it was way ahead
And
of its time. Because you see, starting a newspaper in Calcutta at that point of time, uh, my bosses at the Statesman told me, "You're doing this, it'll wind up, it'll fold up, it'll never work, and we won't be able to take you back. We love you a lot. Don't go." So it was considered a foolish thing to do, but it was journalism ahead of its time, sure. And it was the first startup in journalism, really, in that sense. Uh, so that was that, and then 1990 I joined Economic Times in Delhi in TN Ninan's team, and then I went to the main paper after a couple of years. Then I was
wonderful.
there for a while, for quite a while. In fact, I was in and out of Times of India and Bennett Coleman several times, and I worked for the Business Standard after that for a couple of years, and with Financial Express Group for a while, and then back to Times of India, where that was my last bit before we started civil society. So last 3 years in 20 to 23 in TOI, and then civil society.
Two or three mastheads which you look up to as promoting interesting alternative journalism in India today. Can you name
They-
them?
Well, you know, I'm not sure about alternative journalism, what it means, but people, you know, people are trying. Everyone, like civil society, tries to do their own thing, and do we get it right? Don't we get it right? Never have the time to think. So there are people who are trying to do this, and Caravan does
Like who?
it, we do
Yeah.
it, Caravan does it, um, and they each one is in their own mode. Yeah, uh, there's a assumption people make, mm, that this is small and that is those guys are big. Uh, that's good. The small is bad. Now, this was never so in the past. Mm. You had magazines like Frontier, okay, and such magazines, which were neither small nor big. They just existed, and they put out information which people took in an era when information was not as easily shared as it is today.
Right.
Okay, more so today, it does not matter. It does not matter which sugar daddy owns you, doesn't own you, the size of your office, how many people come with tiffin carriers every day and go home with empty tiffin carriers in the none of all this matters. The point is, boss, do you have a story to tell? if you have a story to tell, it will find its way to people like water. It will find its way to people because you have today technologies which carry it. You know, you can have a huge readership like we have today and not be able to monetize it because in the old fashioned way they would print papers and try to fudge print numbers, right? In today's world, you're writing a story, putting it out, someone's taking it, putting it into a WhatsApp group, doing this, doing that, 20 other things are happening, then the readerships are phenomenal, right? Are you having an impact? Of course you're having an impact because people read that and it filters in, and at a subliminal level it makes a difference. And sometimes not even at a subliminal level, it in a very upfront way, in a very solid way, in a way in which it transforms what's happening around you, it makes a difference. So there is no such thing, in my opinion, as small and big. If you want to define journalism, you have to define it that do you have a story to tell, and can you tell that story well? So, I don't get into this thing of numbers because I think it's a having been there myself, having
Yeah,
been at the highest levels myself, it's a fudge, and it's a fudge to keep out competition.
I get
You
you.
see,
Very well put. Very well put.
it's a fudge to keep out competition. If today you want to, I know we've started a small business which today is 20 years old. No distributor will touch you. No advertiser will come to you. No media buyer will come let you through his door. Uh, and why? Because you're small. But if you say that, listen, would you like to see what I have to say? They don't have the time because you're entirely driven by this false metric of the market. It's a false metric. It's designed to keep some families in charge, in control of the information that society has. And they've done a lousy job of it, as you can see.
Tell us something about Rita, your partner and partner in crime for
She,
this.
so she's an equal partner in this, absolutely, and more than equal, perhaps more than me. Rita
Yeah,
spent a lot of time doing, amazing work at a lot of incredible work at grassroots. She
yeah.
understands. While I've flipped through many domains, right, and so that's maybe my strength. But the real social issues that we take up, she knows to dissect very well, and she understands them much better than I do, perhaps. And we function in this way. Many of the things I write get rejected, need to be redone, and we are a completely democratic setup in that way. But let me tell you, despite all these challenges, civil society has, touch wood, never missed a single issue.
Wow, that's an
Yes,
achievement in itself.
yeah. And during the pandemic, we continued to publish, though we couldn't print. And then finally, we brought out the issues later in the printed form. But we started our YouTube channel at that time. We did other things. The YouTube channel, again, it hasn't got the attention it deserves. It's getting it now. There's so many other things. We are an undercapitalized little media business,
But
right?
it's very accessible. It's very accessible, and anyone can visit it. And I don't think you have any paywalls or.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've been focused on, can we get enough money together to do what we want to do, as opposed to, can we do what will get us so much money that we don't have to do anything ever again, right? Now the two different
There's a
approaches, and
dilemma. There's a dichotomy there. Yeah.
yeah, our approach has been a little different. Our approach is, can we get enough to do what we want to do, and we're not going to write the story saying that we have so many young people reading us, so many 45-year-olds, 65-year-olds, that, you know, we leave all those marketing metrics to the Times of India and the Hindustan Times, because as you can see, their managers have given them such beautiful advice in the absence of journalists like me, who, while we were there, we had our own say. But in the absence of journalists who will talk back to these people, you can see they've done such a great job that today they can't even sell their papers.
Uh, Having said that, Umesh, what do you see as the fate of the media in India? Where is it moving? What are its pros? What are its cons? What are its challenges? Especially if you're doing
Yeah,
something small and
I think
alternative.
I think you should. we should look at it by asking the question, what is the state of democracy in India? And if the last election results are anything to go by, people still treasure their vote. People who treasure their vote can't do without information. And whatever the current ownership in this media ownership in this country might or might not have done to the publications they own and the journalists they own, because they made monkeys out of the journalists they own. Because who will pay for your EMIs if I don't go and suck up to the government, or I don't suck up to so minister and please my owner? Who will pay for my EMIs? That's a big question. So they made monkeys of their journalists, poor fellows, right? But people will finally value the journalist because a democracy needs information it can trust. Now, it doesn't just need information to say 20 times over that X is a bad guy or Y is a bad guy or this is happening, things which are pretty. It needs information across a range of things. It needs sports information. It needs information on stock markets, on companies, on the environment, on cities, on healthcare. Uh, it needs all this information for a democracy to function. And as long as we have a democracy, and which I believe is in great health and will assert itself from time to time, you will have people who will want to read good journalists and good journalism. Ask yourself, why is it that so many websites, so many people who are running YouTube channels are getting listened to more than the so-called big press? Why do people read us and write? We run 2 pages of letters in civil society, and we have to draw the gate there. We have more letters than that. I can tell you, a lot of so-called big publications don't have that. So, people want information, and who will give them information? Only good journalists.
So where do people find you? One
Okay.
is Instagram,
And our website,
Civil
and
Society
they
Online.
subscribe. They can get a hard copy of the magazine, like a
Yeah,
lot of people do.
yeah.
And uh, well, yeah, this is how you can get us: Twitter, X.
Fascinating. I enjoy your stories every month, and I share them. And I hope you don't have a problem with that. I don't think
No,
you
no,
would.
no, Frederick,
Any
no.
last words? Any last words that I should have said or should have asked, or which I didn't?
No, it's well, it's such fun to talk about journalism, and it's
Yeah.
such fun to talk about what we do as professionals, because this is all that we know. And I think that the future rests with people who journalists who let their profession speak for them rather than they talk about themselves. So, and this is the rare interview I've given. It's given to you. Uh, but journalists who believe that you have to be faceless, the fly on the wall, the guy who will go and get the stories and enjoy the pleasure of writing, packaging, and putting out those stories.
It's such a pleasure, isn't it? When you do an interesting job and you know you're contributing something, you can wake up every morning and still find the energy to jump out of bed and look what the day's
Yes,
challenges are.
yes.
Thanks a ton, Umesh. Thanks a ton for all your time. And I only
Journalism.
regret one thing. I regret that we could not screen share and show people the excellent color images and stories that civil society puts out. But I'm sure there's some way I'll maybe screen capture and put something in between or something of that sort. Thank you so much
I,
for your time.
I think we have the rarest archive. We have the rarest archive of pictures and stories.
It's all there
That
online. All there online. All
no,
20 years of it.
no, no, no,
Okay,
no,
but much of
not
it. Much of it.
yeah.
Much
No,
of
we
it.
have some stuff online, but we have the rarest archive
Okay.
of stuff because
Wow.
of the way in which we have approached our journalism. So it's unique, and we are proud of that.
You have reason to. Thanks a ton. Keep up the good job. We'll be
Thank
in
you,
touch. And I
thank
hope
you.
that other readers are also inspired to check out civil society. Thanks. Thanks so much. Bye.
Mm.